Good morning, everybody. It is Saturday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Steelers mock draft tracker video by Christopher Carter, back from the road. He's been busy covering Pitt hoops, been busy. He was at the Combine before that. He's been a road warrior for us, but now he's home and ready to talk some draft prospects. It's nice to have you on, Chris. We haven't talked in a while about this specific topic.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, I was at the combine. Then yeah, just Pitt basketball. When they go on a run, you got to cover it. So it was a lot of fun. But I'm glad to be back home in my own home and talk with you, Adam. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, if you're just joining us for the first time, this is our weekly kind of sort through of what all the mock drafts around the internet are saying about the Steelers picks in a given week. We're trying to bring up some new names that are rising, names that are falling, kind of just keeping a stock watch on the way the pre-draft process is going, especially this year because the Steelers have so many picks high in the draft. With that said, Chris, my first question for you is one of the more interesting mocks I saw this week. It was by Pro Football Focus. I think it was Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson. There in their mock draft, they have the Steelers trading back from number 17 to I think number 27, and acquiring the 91st overall pick as compensation for moving back 10 spots. There were a lot of names. We're going to go through them here in a second of guys that we've talked about as potential picks at number 17 who are available in that 20 range. What do you think of the idea of them trading back, either at all or that far?
I think it's actually ideal. If you don't see one of the top three offensive tackles, one of the top three corners fall to you at that point, or if any of those guys, like the Steelers should not feel pressured to stay at 17 just to stay at 17. And if they get an option to trade back and keep a first round pick, I think it should absolutely be considered, especially if they can recuperate an extra day two pick. Because Omar Khan has even said, and I think that any expert who's been covering this NFL draft class knows the sweet spot in this class isn't day two, second, third round guys. There's a lot of really talented players at a lot of different positions and positions where the Steelers could use reinforcements right now. And interesting to trade back to 27 to the Bills. One thing I often do, and I tell people this all the time, when you're looking at trade values and how that is, look up the drafttech.com trade value chart. It assigns points to every pick and it lets you see a little bit of a value comparison there as far as what pick is worth worth compared to another pick, and like if in their point system that the Steelers 17th overall pick would be 950 points, that 27th overall pick, which belongs to the Buffalo Bills, would be 680. So you'd be looking around just shy of 300, about 270 points. 270 points is the value of the Bears' first third round pick. If you want to have a scope of what that could look like, so if you're trading with the Bills, you're talking about getting probably their third rounder, but maybe also their fourth rounder or fifth rounder there to kind of make up that value there as far as the chart goes. But I also think teams that could be in play is the New York Giants. They're another team that you could trade for back at 25. And then that would still get you around 230 points, which would still be a really good, third round pick type of range that you could get in there. But yeah, the Steelers could trade back, and I really think that if they can get, like, they already have three day two picks right now, in two in the second round, one in the third round. If they could add another second or another third or two more thirds, I think that those would be ideal moves. I also wouldn't keep off the radar the idea of trading back from 32, because the idea of what's going to happen, what always happens the first day of the draft, everyone drafts their players, and then the show ends and it's on to the second round on the next day. Basically, you have 24 hours where whoever has that first pick in the next round, which the Steelers will with the 32nd overall pick, thanks to the Chase Claypool trade with the Chicago Bears, there are going to be teams that are like, this player fell, we got to go get him. We got to get on the phones. And the Steelers will have the option to trade back from there, and I think that's another option they could consider if they trade back from in the first round, pick up a third round pick or a second round pick, trade back in the top of the second round, and then get another second or third round pick. You could end up with as many as 5 day two picks, which would be very intriguing for the Steelers to have to build their roster, to fill so many different positions and give them a lot of really quality players who can start off as depth options and maybe ascend to starters and even key players for this franchise.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Chris, especially because we know Andy Weidel likes to build a deep roster, right? That was kind of his trademark in Philadelphia, is that 1 to 53, they just have one of the best rosters in the NFL, and it's not just about that top end talent. I think doing that and trying to get 5 day 2 picks is kind of going along with what you're talking about. Of yeah, you're not getting a ton of top end guys, but you're getting a lot of solid guys, and that's what this team has lacked, especially in the Ben Roethlisberger era, where they were devoting so much salary cap to him. Maybe you don't have to do that now that you can add this number of guys in the second round. Just for our viewers who may not have, watched our videos before, who is that top 6 guys that you'd be looking for the Steelers to trade back if they're off the board by 17?
So like guys who, if they trade back, they could be taking. You mean before the trade back or at the trade?
Right. Those top 3 offensive tackles and those top 3 cornerbacks. That if they're not available, that's when maybe we would think the Steelers might try to trade back.
So my top 3 guys at offensive tackle: Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson Jr., and Broderick Jones. Skoronski, a guy who has the size of more of a guard, but is very technical. They loved him at Northwestern. He might be the first offensive tackle off the board. Paris Johnson Jr., the Ohio State lead offensive tackle. There's also DeJuan Jones, but he's more of a second-round pick, I'd say, in this class. But Paris Johnson has all the measurables to be a pro style at left tackle that could play really well there. And Broderick Jones, who's my personal favorite. I just think the way that he plays aggressively could really fit what the Steelers are trying to do. He also has the right kind of build. If any 3 of those guys fall you at 17, you run to the podium, you draft them, you call it a happy day, and that's your first round pick. As far as cornerbacks go, the top guys are Christian Gonzalez, who I think will be gone in the top 10 of this NFL draft class. Devin Witherspoon, who could fall because it's been interesting. He didn't run at the combine, so there's been some speculation of how far he could fall down. So that's something to watch there. And then, of course, Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback, everyone's talking about this year because the obvious connections with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But also Deontay Banks, a guy that we'll get into a little bit later. He's a guy that's kind of risen up the ranks, and now it's kind of challenging for being maybe the 3rd or the 4th cornerback who's off the board there. But yeah, so if Witherspoon, Gonzalez, Porter, Skoronski, Johnson, and Jones are all off the board, I think. And then, of course, there's other positions where, if just gonna pick a random name here. If Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver from TCU, who's projected to be the best, if he falls to you, do you pass that up? That's tough. Lucas Van Ness, defensive line prospect, I think that could be tough to pass up at 17. And then it just depends how they value other guys like Brian Brzee from Clemson, Miles Murphy from Clemson, other guys like that. But yeah, that's where the range you'd find. Trade back maybe into the later 20s, and just a little bit of messing around here while we were talking here. I just went to PFF and just did one of their trades, and I just looked for trade options at 17. Trading back, got an easy acceptance from the Giants. Giving them the 17th overall pick. They moved the Steelers back to 25, but they got the 57th overall pick, so that's second round value there. And you got the 128th overall pick. That's in the 4th round. So you're getting an extra day 3 pick and an extra day 2 pick. And it's important to note the Steelers do not have any picks in the 5th or 6th rounds. So any extra day 3 picks also would be valuable to this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, I think you set me up well for where I'm going to take this next, which is some of the names that were available in this mock where the Steelers traded back to 27. Some guys who were available in the 20s that we've talked about as potential picks for the Steelers at 17 that are getting picked in the 20s in this particular mock. I'm going to read some of these names, Chris, some of which you already mentioned. I'm going to ask which ones you would have been happy with the Steelers taking at 17 and maybe ecstatic with if they can get later on. My list is Lucas Van Ness, you mentioned at number 22, out of Iowa. Clemson edge, Miles Murphy at 23. This one has Broderick Jones going at number 24, so maybe he's in the mix to be taken further back. Nolan Smith from Georgia at 25, and Clemson defensive lineman Brian Brzee at 29. Chris, how many of those guys would you be happy with if the Steelers had gotten them at 17, let alone possibly later in the draft?
I'd say Miles Murphy's the one question mark because of his injury. Plus, I don't know if the Steelers need to take a pure edge. He's more of a pure edge in the defensive line. Lucas Van Ness is the guy who can play the edge but also move to the inside, and that's why he's very intriguing. That's also why Ray Fittipaldo made him his first round pick for the Steelers in his 1.0 mock draft that he did about a month ago, I want to say. But certainly, yeah, going over those names, those are all really good options. And that's why I was intrigued about Broderick Jones because Daniel Jeremiah from Move the Sticks, the podcast, he said, yeah, he just mocked Broderick Jones to the Steelers at 17. I'm telling you, man, if they get that kind of guy, he has the potential to be a pillar offensive line leader for the future right now. They have a lot of veterans who have kind of like developed and are like doing okay, but he's a guy that could, come in as a rookie, start, be productive, then get sharper, and then eventually become one of the better offensive linemen in the NFL. I think that's certainly something that you look at there. And then as far as the other names, Nolan Smith, I love Nolan Smith as a prospect. I just don't know if his build is what you want to be drafting in the first round. I think that he has extreme explosiveness. He's a very sharp guy. Talked to him at the combine. I like it. I like him a lot. I just don't know if pure edge is what you're going for right now with this first round draft pick that the Steelers are. And then who were the other two names that you said? Brian Brzee, and then there was one more.
I think it was. I think you mentioned everyone. You mentioned Miles
Okay.
Murphy, so I think we touched everyone.
Well, Brian Brzee, one thing I'll say is that I think that he has potential. I think I wanted to see more polish from him overall. I think that he has the build that you want a defensive lineman. I think he has the motor that you want. I think he just has to put some things together. But at 6'5", 300, that's around the range that you want your defensive lineman. He was productive at Clemson. Yeah, so I think that he'd also be a good pick. All those guys, again, you trade back into the 20s, you're not going to be mad with who you get unless you just pick someone very odd and random. But there's going to be a lot of options for Omar Khan and Andy Weidel to pick over, and then Mike Tomlin to ultimately make the final choice.
Just want to finish up on Broderick Jones. He's fallen back in a few other mock drafts as well. Do you have any concern that his stock has fallen from maybe a possible top 10 pick to maybe in that 15 to 25 range?
It makes me wonder, and I said this would be how this plays out. I think that part of this is this quarterback class has really changed things up. Anthony Richardson, having the combine that he did has, opened a lot of eyes to, what could he be in the NFL? So now there's a potential. Some people are talking about 5 quarterbacks going in the first round, which would be insane if you thought that if you said that about like a month and a half ago before we got to the combine and we started looking at things. Obvious guys, Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, those are the automatic 3. But Anthony Richardson's up in there, and then Hendon Hooker is poking his head into some conversations. I don't think he'll go ahead of the Steelers, but if 4 quarterbacks go, then you're going to start bumping other positions down. And some people there's some mock drafts that are having Jalen Carter being drafted at the bottom of the top 10. And if Jalen Carter's going down that low, then you start looking like, okay, well, where did Tyree Wilson go? Where did Will Anderson go? Then you look at your corners. What happened with Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon? Are either of them there? And then again, when you start adding things up, eventually they're just run out of spots where the Steelers have to worry about not getting their guy. And again, this is just computer generated, not that serious. This in this one that I was literally doing just to do the trade scenario we were talking about. The Bears took Peter Skoronski at 9th overall. The Titans took Paris Johnson Jr. at 11th overall. Broderick Jones went to the Patriots at 14th overall. So they went off the board that quickly. But again, just depends on what teams are talking about, what they're prioritizing. I wouldn't put too much stock into Broderick Jones just being mocked a little bit later as of late. It might just be, they're that much higher in some other players right now.
I gotcha. One of the other names you mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is Deontay Banks. He's a name who's kind of shot up on the Steelers' radar in the last few weeks because I think he started as more of a second round pick type in terms of his perceived value. But this week, 11 out of the 12 mock drafts I tracked had him going in the first round. 2 of them had him going to the Steelers. So, Chris, what's your read on him? And is he kind of like maybe starting to become a 1B to Joey Porter's 1A, where if Joey Porter gets selected, you'd be happy with Deontay Banks, given the way, people around the league seem to be valuing him right now?
I think that one thing about Deontay Banks is that he tested very well at the combine, and that opened a lot of people's eyes. And when you look at his tape, he's a guy that shows a lot of good technique. I think one thing that he needs to improve is his consistency. I think sometimes he gets beat when he tries to jam guys, and he doesn't finish enough there. But as far as running with guys, good burst to catch up when he's trailing a guy, maintaining leverage. I think he has all the tools. The question would be just, can he put it together? The Steelers have shot and missed on some cornerbacks over the past few years, and he has the measurables. It's just about, does his technique work out there? but you look at his 4.35 40-yard dash time and you're just like awesome. Then you look at a 42-inch vertical and 11-foot 4-inch broad jump. These are all really good measurables, and these are the things that you want in a guy. So Deontay Banks, he's crept his way up into these conversations, and deservedly so. I think that he's a good player, and he could be a starter for the Steelers and could be a long-term starter for the Steelers. But I think one thing that everyone's going to be looking at is they're going to be looking at these other top guys and what's his value versus them, and how far would he be able to make it down in the NFL draft, because you don't want to overdraft guys. The Steelers have a lot of needs, but certainly if I'm the Steelers and I trade back and he's sitting there and I'm sitting there at 25, I think that's a great range to get him.
Yeah, especially if you're getting value back in return. Chris, another guy who's in that realm of shooting up I think shooting up the board might be a little bit of a strong term, but it's kind of solidifying as a first round pick, is Darnell Wright of Tennessee. He famously did not give up a sack last season. He's a big guy. He's well regarded for his pass rushing. I think his work in the running game was a little more in question, but it seems like teams are starting to value him as a bona fide first round pick. If the Steelers don't get one of those three top tackles that we were mentioning earlier, and we're in maybe a trade back scenario, is he a guy you'd be happy with in that 25 range if they trade back there, or is he someone who's maybe becoming someone you'd be happy with even at 17?
Daniel Jeremiah mocked Darnell Wright to the Steelers in like his first overall mock, and again, I think that Darnell Wright is a good player. I have a hard time seeing him as the first round guy. I think that sometimes he needs to get better at putting it all together. I think that he has the the overall functional strength to be the kind of offensive tackle the Steelers need. I think he still has a lot of work and polish to be able to do, and I think that that's part of the question there is, can he do that polishing in short order? If you're going to pick him in the first round, you're expecting him to kind of contribute really, really quickly. But sometimes I think his size kind of gets ahead of him, where he bullies a lot of people, and I think sometimes when you're bullying a lot of people, you do a little too much, and then guys can get better leverage on you and knock you out of your spot. I think he has to limit those times when that happens. But Darnell Wright, I think that he'd be a good Steelers pick if he's in the second round, 17th overall. Just that's a little rich for my blood.
Yeah, I can see, until this week, Chris, I think I was pretty much of the same opinion. I think it was seeing him valued a little bit higher that made me say, okay, maybe I can see this a little bit more than I could before. I've kind of always thought of him as, more of a day two pick. But it is interesting to see how he's trending in a different direction. Another name that came up this week in one mock, there weren't a whole lot of new names across the internet this week, Chris. So I was kind of scouring for what are some other angles with some of these names we've been talking about a lot. One new name was Nathaniel Dell, the receiver from Houston. I think he's only 5'8", 165, so does not bring a lot of size to the table. Probably is not a guy you're going to put on the outside, but his numbers for the Cougars were pretty huge. I think he had 17 touchdowns and almost 1,400 yards receiving, averaged like close to 13 yards a catch. Is he a guy that if the Steelers end up with on day two or maybe early on day three, you'd be happy to see maybe get some playing time early on?
I think he's a guy that you would immediately slap in the slot. His ability to separate, he has decent speed. Those are the things that you're going to be looking for from him. I think he needs to sharpen his route tree, but he's 5'8" guy, like you said, like he's smaller. You already have kind of one of those guys in Calvin Austin, and who's really fast. I think he's a guy you could look at, but I wouldn't be doing so until maybe the third or even the fourth round. I just think that there's a lot of other positions that they could get really good value for, and find someone who could be a little bit bigger and just a little bit faster than Nathaniel Dell to play at wide receiver. Plus, again, wide receiver just every year they're churned. There's tons of talent that comes at that position. But if they got him, I don't think it'd be a bad pick. I just think that they have other pressing needs, and I think that they have a guy in Calvin Austin who, if he does come back healthy, you'll be kind of happy to have him back. And then I think Nathaniel Dell would have a hard time finding the field at that point. But as finding Kenny Pickett targets, that's got to be a priority for this organization.
Yeah, I think he was a third round pick in the mock that I saw him and decided to write a little bit about him. By the way, there is a written version of this mock draft tracker. I'll leave the link to that down in the description. So make sure you check that out to kind of get the numbers and stuff, less of our, kind of takes like you're getting on here. So, Chris, there's one other name I wanted to bring up that keeps showing up on mock drafts. It seems like every week, Siaki Ika from Baylor, the nose tackle, there's usually at least one multi-round mock draft that has him going to the Steelers as a day 2 pick. Usually, it's almost never as a first rounder. Um, but I kind of feel like the signing of Larry Ogunjobi kind of really limited the utility the Steelers might have for a guy like Ika. What do you think of him, especially? I've asked you about him before, but what do you think of him, especially in light of Ogunjobi coming back?
I think he's a nose guy, but a pure nose guy. I don't think he moved well in the combine. I think that he needs to get in a little bit better shape to kind of do what the Steelers want a guy of that talent level to perform. But I think that he'd be an interesting later pick. I wouldn't pick him in the second round. If he's sitting in the third, I think that could be a good spot to get him. But just Siaki Ika, I think he has potential. He's big, he's strong, but I think he still has a lot of work to do as far as kind of completing his game, which is why I don't think he's going to be too early of a pick.
Yeah, that's kind of my read as well. I just find it interesting that every week I open one up and there he is. He's next to Joey Porter. I feel like he's the most consistent guy that I've been seeing in these mock drafts for recent weeks. I'd probably go him, Joey Porter first, him, and then Deontay Banks in the last handful of weeks. So I just continue to find that interesting. Chris, it was also a week of big pro days. Penn State is having theirs as we're recording this on Friday afternoon. I believe Ohio State was earlier in the week. Was there anything you saw in those pro days that you found interesting from a Steelers perspective of guys who they need to have their eyes on?
I think one thing that came out through the week was the visit to Iowa. Which isn't a normal stop for the Steelers early in the week. I think that Jack Campbell and Lucas Van Ness both are interesting guys there. I think it's interesting that the Steelers top brass didn't go to Penn State. They sent Terrell Austin. They sent that crew, which maybe makes me wonder. Is Joey Porter Jr. the move there? But also, here's the thing: is if Joey Porter Jr. is the move, Mike Tomlin doesn't need to get to know Joey Porter Jr. There is a familiarity there for obvious reasons. So I don't put too much stock into that right now. I keep track of those things because at the end of the process, we'll see who all got the visits. But as far as Penn State, Joey Porter Jr. didn't run. I would not be alarmed by that. He had a great combine, so why am I going to put that at risk? Jair Brown, want to see his results. I haven't had a chance to because I was at Pitt's spring practice, and then I've been recording shows here for the PGs. So we'll get to that later. But I do think that there's some good value there for some of these Penn State picks. So lots of different things that I think that the Steelers are actually really interested in right now. And these pro days, we'll continue to see them roll out and where the top brass goes, because typically whenever Mike Tomlin and the GM Kevin Colbert or now Omar Khan, whenever they go together someplace, that's usually that puts them that player or the top prospect that you knew they were there to see, that puts that school's top prospect on the map as far as, hey, this person's definitely on their big board. As far as that, it's very rare they don't go to someone don't send their top brass to someone's pro day and then pick them in the first round.
Chris, I wanted to pull at that Jair Brown thread a little bit. Now that Terrell Edmunds is gone, that they have a hole at safety that compared to last year's team. Jair Brown is one of the better safeties in the draft. I guess it's just a question of how do you value that need at safety. Is he someone you could see the Steelers going with on day 2, or is safety just not that high of a priority for you?
I think safety could be a priority, especially with it right now. And I think with Terrell Austin's defense, you want safeties that can rotate. I'm not 100% sure that Brown is the move in day 2. I think that if he's sitting there at 120, absolutely, that's your move. You bring him in. He's more of a box safety, and that kind of fits the role that Terrell Edmunds left wide open there. But I think he's physical. I like that. He plays downhill. I think that sometimes he could be a bit sharper on his assignments. And I think that could be the biggest thing with Jair Brown. But certainly, I think that he'd be worth a day 3 pick. Day 2, and I've seen some people push that. I'm just not feeling that just yet.
Yeah, and I think that's also a function of the position, and I think how it's valued across the league. But Chris, did you have any other draft headlines, nuggets, things that caught your eye this week that you wanted to bring up before we signed off here?
Just that I think it's going to be really fun to see, who's playing what games. Because one thing I always remind people is that when you hear stories, most things that you're hearing, somebody wants you to hear it. But you have to determine: is it an agent who wants to hear that, or is it a team? Is it a player who's pushing different stories out there, different reports out there, as far as who wants what, or what a player's doing at a certain point in time. So keep an eye out on those things, and just try to always take things, not for face value. Think about it before someone goes out there and says, oh, this is what's going on here. You never know what actually could be the plan behind something.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you for joining me this week. It's always great to have you on here. We've had Brian Bacco on the last couple of weeks. No matter who we're getting in these slots, there's lots of knowledge. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Also, make sure you check out all of Chris's work during the week. He's the host of the North Shore Drive. Normally, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he's talking Steelers. Chris, do you have anything interesting coming up next week?
I mean, we're just going to keep talking Steelers. Pitt spring balls in full motion. The Penguins, can they hold on and get back into the playoffs? The Pirates, who's emerging to kind of make the full roster and all that. Lots of stuff to talk about. We'll be going over that on the North Shore Drive podcast. Okay,
so make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and also please check out our subscription deal down in the description. $6 for 6 months of access to Post-Gazette.com. Everything I'm writing, everything Chris is writing about Pitt, everything all of our Steelers are writing about the draft process and free agency. You can get all of that for $1 a month. It's a phenomenal deal. So check that out. Otherwise, we will be back next week with plenty more draft talk and plenty more Steelers talk. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to Post-Gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.